You are welcome to the last lecture of History of Southern Africa. Today we'll quickly take the Union of South Africa, and also we'll take the African National Congress activities to get independence for the blacks, and also we'll also take the Pan-African Congress, how they were able to get independence. Before I continue with the lecture, I would like to let you know that so far we have been able to take the early inhabitants of Southern Africa, where we took those who came to Southern Africa very early. After that, we took the lecture on the Great Trek, Infekane, and the European coming, the Boers, and also the British, how they came into Southern Africa. Today we'll be taking quickly the Union of Southern Africa, and I want you all to listen to understand how the Union came about. After the Great Trek, in fact, the Great Trek led to what was known in history as the Boer War. And after the Boer War, that was when the Union of Southern Africa came to be. I must let you know that the Boer War was a war in which the Boers, who have ancestry from the Dutch, and also the British, who were also white Europeans, were at loggerheads with each other. One issue which came up from the Boer War was that even though the British defeated the Boers, the British won the war but lost in the public opinion, especially in Europe. Other European countries such as France, Germany, and all that, were unhappy in which one European country treated the country. And the British lost a lot in terms of diplomatic relationship with other Europeans. The other Europeans saw the way and manner, the carnage, the destruction of the Boers, and they felt that the Boers did not warrant such a very bad treatment from the British. And as such, they were unhappy with the way the British handled issues that led to and they were unhappy with the way the British treated the Boers during the war. Especially a man who led the British, Lord Kitchener, who was the British commander. He ordered a kind of war of destruction and ruthlessness against the whole people who are Boers. They burnt down their crops, even their women and children were some treated in a very ill manner. And this did not go well with other European nations. Even though at this period there were no television and all that, but they had and listened, and we are surprised how the British, who were more superior in weapons, treated the Boers. Even the British people who heard of the slaughter and way in which they were treated during the Boer War were unhappy with their soldiers, and they felt that something must be done to at least make the Boers happy again, and also have a good relation with other European nations. For instance, Lloyd George, who later served as the Prime Minister during the First World War, vehemently denounced the carnage Quoting directly from George here, we move from valley to valley, lifting cattle and sheep, burning and looting, and turning out women and children to weep in despair, to weep in despair beside the ruin of their beautiful homesteads. So you could see us had not done very well. That indeed the Boers had not done very well. The British had not done very well to the Boers. And the Union of South Africa was now a union that the aim was to at least bring some form of sanity into South Africa. And also, it also led to some form of independence for the Boers. Remember, one of the things which the Boers had, the problem which they had, was that language domination. You remember where they felt that the British were forcing them to speak English everywhere, in the courts, in the school, and all that. And this they were unhappy with. And that led to the Great Wreck. So when, after this Boer War, which ended in 1902, is a situation where there will be an amicable solution was then brought about. The period we were talking about, the Boer War began in the 19th century and ended in the very early part of the 20th century. I must let you know, a lot people from Britain and Boer, who have Dutch ancestry, all came into Southern Africa as a result of the pursuit or the discovery of diamond and all that. But we all understood that in the past, in the 15th, in the 16th century, in fact, 1652 to be precise, the British came into Southern Africa. The Dutch came first, and later on the British. We must understand that during the Boer Wars, all these were thrown away when two white nations, two white groups, were fighting because of African raw materials, African mineral resources, and so many other things. And this same group of persons have been in those lands for years, and as such, have created a lot of they have created a lot for themselves while being there. Until today, the whites are still there as a result of those things which culminated in them staying back in Africa. I've always explained to you that Africa had the best land, and as such is a place in which the Europeans would even want for themselves. So go to anywhere in Africa, southern, western, eastern, you will be surprised how beautiful the weather is and how conducive the weather is. So therefore, most of them preferred to stay in Africa even rather than Europe. The Afrikaners, who could be also said to be the Boers, the Cape Boers, the discovery of diamond had its place among other factors that contributed to the development of a new spirit of exclusivism among the Cape Dutch. The Fellowship of the True Afrikaners was formed in 1875 and stood for from then on, they had this Afrikaner nationalism and anti-British flavor. which also led to what we call the Great Trek. Also, I mean, after the Great Trek, which also led to anti-British activities, which led to the Boer Wars. In 1879, the movement was extended by the formation of what is called the Afrikaner League. Remember, the less would be seen as the Boers. The Afrikaners now annexed a place called the Transvaal in 1877. And also, when they annexed Transvaal, they believed this Transvaal and other areas, the Orange Free States and other areas, should belong to the Afrikaners and would in fact be called the White Land, which means they would exclude. Remember, they had these Calvinist ideas that they were superior to the blacks. They would exclude every black who is there. But the British did not agree with this, which now led to what we call the Boer Wars. And as it led to the Boer Wars, immediately after the Boer Wars, the British sought to assuage the Afrikaners, the Boers, which led to a series of things which later became the Union of South Africa. The British, to allay the anger and bitterness of the Boers, a number of policies were then reversed for them to allay the anger of the Boers. A number of policies were then reversed. One of those policies which they reversed was the Dutch language was to be used again in schools and the law courts. You remember I said before the Great Trek and also before the Great Trek, the Dutch language was put in the background, and as such, the Dutch language was one that was not even spoken in the courts. So if you are having a case, you if you do not know how to speak English, and even though you are a white person who of Dutch ancestry, you may have to seek an interpreter in the court who will tell you what the judge and the lawyers are saying, and which did not all go well with the Boers. So one of the things which they did immediately after the Boer War was to try to assuage them by reversing the language, which means in their schools, the language, the Dutch language will now be spoken also together with the English, and also in the courts and anywhere the Dutch language was elevated again. The British spent £5 million to alleviate the plight of the Boer farmers, which means the Boer farmers were given, there was some stipend given to them amounting to about £5 million. This was to assuage, to make the at least make the Boers not to be too angry. In 5 years, all these promises came to pass, and self-government was also given to the Boers in 1906. So in 1906, self-government was given to the Boers. Let us put that in context with what was happening in Nigeria. Remember, in 1906, Lagos and Southern Protectorate of Nigeria were. But in the case of South Africa, in 1906, the Boers were given self-government, something closest to independence. In 1909, the provinces of the Cape, Natal, Orange River, and Transvaal united to form the Union of South Africa. So you could see where the union is coming from. That in 1909, the provinces of Cape, the provinces of Natal, the provinces of Orange River, the provinces of Transvaal, all united to form the Union of South Africa. They came together to form what is called the Union of South Africa. And when that was done, of course, these were leading to one thing: a independence for the whites in Southern Africa. And the first united parliament that included the British and Boers met in 1910. There was a parliament which now, remember, the British and Boers were fighting, but now they have become somewhat friends. So they had their parliament in 1910. They were together to form what is known as the Legislative Assembly. The first prime minister of this new found freedom for the whites, the British, and also the Boers, was a man called Botha, one of the Boer generals, who had fought hardest against the British. One of the Boer, you remember, he was the enemy of the British during the Boer Wars, but now he has become the first prime minister. The federation actually gave much power to the Boers, who increased in numbers over the British settlers. But the union itself remains part of what we know as the British Empire. The union still remains part of what is known as the British Empire. So you could see that indeed the white independence was coming up. The Statute of Westminster gave it an absolute self-government and a dominion status. And a dominion status. The dominions, namely South Africa, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, supported Britain in the First World War. And if following their self-government status with Britain, attended the Versailles Conference as equals with the mother country, with the British Empire. That is what is meant by mother country here. What simply happened is that after they were given dominion status, they were given self-government. When they now met after the First World War, they had gone to fight that battle with the British, having the hope that by the time they are coming back, they will all be given independence. Remember those names of nations that were now added, names such as New Zealand, Canada, Southern Africa, and even Australia, who joined to fight the Germans in the First World War with the British. All got came to the conference in Versailles as equals to the British. And what simply that meant politically, which means they had votes in an international conference. If they were part of the British Empire, that vote would not have been given to them. It would only be the British Empire making those votes. But these ones now had votes with the British Empire, which shows in foreign policy some form of equality in status, had attained control over their own foreign policy. One of the things that you know that a nation is independent is that its foreign policy depends on its own administration. No matter how small a nation is, a nation that is independent, let's mention them: Lesotho. I'm making bringing names of smaller nations such as Lesotho and Co. Although however small they are, even Togo, however small they are, one of the things that makes it independent is the fact that its foreign policy lies in the administration that is there. And this period, the dominions started making their own decisions in their foreign policy, and could also make treaties with other independent nations, which means in foreign policy you could also discuss with other nations and have bilateral relationship and with other nations, and even form associations with other nations. This proves the independence of the blacks, of the whites during this period. And South Africa became technically independent. This was emphasized in 1925 when South Africa refused to sign the Treaty of Locarno, which means the British Empire signed it. Others may have signed it. They refused. That shows that they are independent of the mother country, which is the British Empire at that time. This led to the Imperial Conference in 1926, when it was declared Great Britain and the Dominions are autonomous communities within the British Empire, equal in status and in no way subordinate to each other in any aspect of their domestic and external affairs, though united by a common allegiance to the crown. Even though they still subscribe to the Queen being their heads of state, but remember, take note of what is said there. They now became equal in status. They have this equality in status with their fellow, with other Dominion nations, such as Australia, such as New Zealand, such as Canada. This Dominion technically, finally gave South Africa independence. But why all this was happening, the real owners of the land, I'm going to the activities of the ANC and the PAC now. Why all this were happening, the real owners of the land were relegated. We are relegated. They were not even part of the discussion for independence of to become a dominion. They were not even seen as a people who would even be given any form of recognition. And as at 1910, parliamentary membership was limited to whites. Remember, there was a legislative assembly. 1910, parliamentary, which means those who are in the parliament were only whites. And legislation passed in 1913 restricted black land ownership to 13% of South Africa's total area. So you could see that in 100%, blacks could only own 13% of the land. Remember, the blacks were more in population than the whites. This was how he treated black South Africans, which included Bantus, which included the Bushmen, which included the Khois. All were put into the background, while the whites claimed if the blacks could get just 13%, 87% would surely belong to the whites. In 1912, the African National Congress was founded to fight this unfair government policy. The blacks now began to fight against this unfair policy of relegating them into the background. The British Empire supported the white supremacist tendencies. Whatever may be happening, even though those whites, the Boers and the British, remember they were able to patch their differences. And when their differences were patched, remember they were able to patch their differences. And when those differences were patched, they forgot a vital group, which was the blacks. And even the British, the mother country, the British Empire, supported this at the detriment of the blacks. The whites oppressed their black counterparts. The black counterparts, their black counterparts were oppressed. They were put into relegated and discarded and put into perpetual, I don't know what to call it, whether slavery or inhuman treatment, which this did not augur well with a political party like the African National Congress. Africans who were original owners of South Africa, but were forced out of their land. Remember, just 13% was given to them, while the whites took 87%, which indeed was a shame to not just it was a shame to the world. a group that we are humans. Even dogs may not have been treated in this way. Africans became second-rated citizens, and we are unhappy with the subservient role it had to play in South Africa. The whites supported the British in World War II. Remember, the whites now technically are independent. They had this dominion status, which made them have control over their foreign policy, even their economic policy. So the world, of course, you know, the World War II came up 1939 to 1945. The whites also supported them, and the whites, of course, supporting them without even asking or giving the blacks the necessary support that they needed. Some of the whites deviated from this policy and supported a movement favoring cooperation with the evil Nazis. Even though the whites, the British and the Boers, who were whites in South Africa, supported the British, some even deviated and gave support to the German Nazis. Of course, we all know, you remember what happened in the Second World War when the Germans were fighting against the British Empire, the Americans, and all that. I don't think we should be going to that now. We are talking about activities of the ANC during the 20th century. The National Party in 1948, after an election, began in the 1948 election. The National Party, which is a white party, white in the sense that these are white South Africans, including the Boers of the British, began to make a slogan called that if we win this election, there will be this policy at that time, which they called apartheid, which simply could be described as separation, apartheid. That there will be this policy of separateness between they who are the whites and those who are the blacks. Apartheid, which means what apartheid simply means, amenities will be divided. Amenities will be divided. There will be schools for blacks, schools for whites. Hotels will be meant for whites. Hotels will be also for blacks. But of course, you will know that whatever the blacks are getting will be far, far inferior to what the whites will be given to. Even sometimes there was so much humiliation made to the blacks. You will see in an hotel, blacks, don't come to this hotel. And also dogs, don't come to this hotel. It was as bad as that. It was as bad as that. The apartheid policy now divided the country into two. White minority population getting a large chunk of the amenities, and the black getting poor, subservient, and amenities that were not even fit for human beings. The apartheid law classified people according to three major racial groups: white, black Africans, and people of mixed descent. When they say mixed descent now, we are talking about Pakistanis, Indians, and all that. People of mixed descent. We are talking about people such as the mulatto and all that. People of mixed descent. Later, Pakistanis and Indians were added as the fourth category. So mixed descent, they would maybe have been marriage or relationship between black and white, which may have brought mulattoes, the one you call half-caste in the Nigerian perspective. But later on, it was first divided into three major racial groups. Later on, it became four when Pakistanis and Indians were now added. So we now have four groups. The laws determined where members of each group could live, which means the South Africa had been divided into 4 now. So you can't just go and live anywhere. It is the law who determines where you could live, what type of jobs you could hold, what type of education you could receive. The laws also prohibited the social contract between the races, which means they are not to marry each other now. With the apartheid policy, whites can't marry blacks, and maybe Pakistanis and Indians can't marry blacks or even the whites. So every race remains yours, and your job will be determined, the way you work will be determined by what the law says where the law says you should work, and so many other things which is there. The races were deemed mixed with each other. Hence, the citizens were segregated in all public facilities, every single public facility. The citizens were segregated. People who openly opposed the apartheid policies were considered communists. You could see that if you, of course, the blacks will openly oppose it, so they will be considered communists. And remember, this was the Cold War era, where communists are considered enemies of the state because they believe communists support Russia, and as such, the state would frown as such. Government passed strict security legislation, which in effect turned South Africa into a police state. South Africa became what is known as a police state, which means everything is governed by laws. The police could arrest you if you break any of these laws. South Africa became a difficult place to even live. It was some kind of Eldorado for the whites, but it wasn't that for the blacks. The blacks were put in perpetual pain and slavery and servitude, and this did not augur well with the blacks. The African National Congress actively opposed, of course, they would oppose the apartheid policy and engage in increasing political combat with the government. In 1955, the African National Congress issued its Freedom Charter, which stated that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. Get this right. The African National Congress issued what is known as the Freedom Charter, that South Africa belongs to all who lived in it. ANC members who believe South Africa belongs to only to black Africans formed another rival parties. So among the African National Congress, because of ideology, 2 different parties were now formed. ANC members, now among them, came also the PAC, the Pan-Africanist Congress, in 1959. This group believed that South Africa belongs to only the blacks. So get this ideological difference very well. ANC believes South Africa belongs to all, which means whites, blacks, Pakistanis, Indians, and of course everyone should be treated equally. PAC believes that South Africa belongs to the blacks. They believed as it was, so it should be. Remember, during our past lessons, I have told you that the blacks, Bantus, Bushmen, or San, and the Khois were majorly the owners of Southern Africa. They were the ones there. Those lands belonged to them until the whites came and also suppressed them there. And now, among the blacks, the PAC, the ANC, there's this argument. ANC believes South Africa belongs to all. PAC believes South Africa belongs to just only the blacks. In order to displace the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress organized a mass demonstration that led to the massacre of black protesters in Sharpeville in March 1960 in order to the PAC were so agitated about their cause that South Africa belonged just to the whites, just to the blacks alone. And they went on a mass demonstration, what Nigerians will call riots or protest. And of course, some of you still remember the NSAS protests in Nigeria. That was what happened. And a lot of blacks, of course, the police were whites, and every other security agencies still were in the hands of the whites, shot them, and a lot of them were killed in a place called Sharpeville in March 1960. In response to the demonstration, the government declared, which means the white administration now declared a state of emergency and banned all political organizations, banned them, including the African National Congress and also the Pan-Africanist Congress. So these two associations who represented the black community were banned as a result of what happened in the place called Sharpeville and their activities. And when they are banned, they are not expected to use that organization to push any other agenda. In 1961, after the government had banned the organization, the African National Congress formed a military wing called the Spear of the Nation. The ANC now had to form a military wing, which is called the Spear of the Nation, which began a campaign of sabotage against the government, which means they began to push their agenda, forming a military wing called the Spear of the Nation, which began to sabotage, destroy, attack everything which represents the white administration, the apartheid administration. During the unrest of the next several years, Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu were all sentenced in life in prison for their ANC activities. All these groups were sentenced, but people like Tambo Mbeki were able to escape. And if you have followed the history of Tambo Mbeki, you'll find out that he even at one time was in Nigeria. Tambo Mbeki, they escaped and formed what is known as the external wing of the ANC. People like Tambo Mbeki escaped and formed what is known as the external wing of the ANC. The drawing of racial battle lines were now clear. The drawing of racial battle lines were clear. So South Africa, although a police state, now became a state where whites versus blacks. Remember, whites are human beings, blacks are human beings, but they hated each other because of the kind of policies the apartheid administration brought upon them. They hated each other because of the kind of policies the apartheid administration brought upon them. The war in Angola has split African leaders, and in 1974, of course, in 1974, the General Assembly of the United Nations, forbade South Africa to attend its sessions. This battle, this anger, this hatred between the blacks and the whites became an international issue that even the General Assembly now stopped South Africa. It got to a time, even in sports, we would not be able to go in details to all this. South Africa was stopped from attending sporting programs. And for a long time, South Africa was in exile as regards sports, as regards international relationship. Even among Africans, a lot of activities happening. South Africa was not allowed. When we are saying South Africa here, remember the whites were the ones ruling, and the whites were the ones who had this terrible policy of apartheid, dividing the blacks and giving the blacks what is considered inferior amenities, where they get good or wonderful amenities. You could see from this policy, it now became an international issue. Nations began to take sides. Nations began to support, either continued support of South Africa. White administration in their policies would mean you could be considered a nation that supports poor race relations, a nation that supports poor race relations. The pressure was so much that at one time sanctions was brought upon South Africa. At one time sanctions was born. You know what sanctions means? No more trading, no more any form of relationship, and South African goods were also denied from even going to whatever may be made in South Africa, were even denied from even being bought by other nations. That was what sanctions is. And of course, no nation will be able to face such kind of pressure from international community. How do they help their economy? And all this was pushed upon the Southern Africa. In 1985, even the United States of America imposed upon South Africa a limited extent by then of sanctions. International confidence in South African economy was falling and its effect showing at home. Of course, the people now began to face the pain of what was happening to them internationally. Remember, they have been barred from associating with others. Sanctions were upon them. Their economy had become to fall into tatters. So these pressures began to fall upon the people who were at home. And of course, their economy was deeply affected. A lot began to happen within South Africa. The Dutch Reformed Church, to which the Afrikaners belongs, to which the Boers belong. Remember, before we took the Great Trek, after the Ife Canon and all that, we were even before the Ife Canon, we were already talking about how certain African Boers were Calvinists and believed that everything which Africans belong to were Hamitic, which means they belong to that. They took the Bible in a literary form, that the blacks were sons of Ham, and as such, Ham was cursed. Remember the book of Genesis, where Ham was cursed, and they considered that as the lot for the blacks, that we blacks we are expected to serve the whites. So they took this literally. But remember, Ham was never a black man. Ham was a Jew, or from the Middle East. How he became black, nobody knew. But they interpreted it as such to justify what later became the apartheid policy. Urban terrorism and so many things were beginning to happen in South Africa. Pressure from here and there. So you could see those pressures which began to affect them. The church now looked at it. The church called the Dutch Reformed Church, to which Afrikaners belong, that apartheid was at least a mistake. Remember now, the church now had a moral burden. They were the one championing this Calvinist idea. That moral burden now came upon them and saw that the Africans were indeed ill-treated. And most white Boer, especially South Africans, belong to this church. And they now saw it that it could not even be justified. I just explained to you that Ham, which blacks were related to, was no African, was no black. How he became black, I never knew. But now the church saw it as a mistake. And of course, it will affect the mindset of the whites. This was the situation when P.W. Botha stepped down. P.W. Botha is the leader, president in South Africa, the white president who ruled over South Africa. He had to step down. When he stepped down for a man called F.W.D. Clark, de Klerk, F.W.D. de Klerk, F.W. de Klerk, sorry, F.W. de Klerk. He stepped down for F.W. de Klerk, and is stepping down for F.W. de Klerk. De Klerk had other ideas. In February 1990, F.W. de Klerk announced a new South Africa. He released Nelson Mandela and before long engaged in discussion with the apartheid government. The transition in South Africa was not a simple one. Although de Klerk had rescinded most of the apartheid legislation by the end of 1991, there were many white elites who resisted change. You remember the whites were the ones who were enjoying from the apartheid policy. And when de Klerk came in, a lot of the laws of apartheid were rescinded. Remember the church, the church which the Dutch Reformed Church, which the Afrikaners belonged to, had now saw it as a moral burden and saw it as a reason why that there is a mistake somewhere for apartheid to be supported. Because the church originally was supporting apartheid. But so many whites who had enjoyed and profited from the situation which was there felt that no, they should continually enjoy this, which they revolted in one way or the other against what F.W. de Klerk was doing. But in 1993, the assassination of a man called Chris Hani, a prominent left-wing ANC leader, did not even reverse back what was gained during the period of F.W. de Klerk. And in 1994, black majority leaders, led by the ANC, won an election and took over power in South Africa. And since then, the ANC had continued to rule in South Africa. And independence has finally come to all Southern Africans. Remember, the first independence through the Union of South Africa was more or less independence, dominion status and all that, was more or less independence just for only the whites and misery for the blacks. But in 1994, independence came for all. And South Africans, independence came for all. And all South Africans began to enjoy freedom, not oppressed by apartheid policy or any form of colonial tendency. So that is the lecture I have been able to let you know now through the Boer War, the Union of South Africa, and independence for black Southern Africans, and the role played by the ANC and to some extent the PAC. We can eventually see that now, at least if we follow whatever may be happening in South Africa today, the leadership in South Africa no more push things such as apartheid. All amenities now belong to every race in South Africa, and everyone now enjoy some form of some form of freedom, although they still push here and there. They talk concerning land, they talk concerning this. If you follow their modern, the 21st century, at least you could read the diplomatic hoopla between the president of South Africa today and also the president of the United States of America as issues that relates to land. But we will not be going to that today, but you could see surely that South Africa has gone a long way in pushing for freedom for all of its people. I would like also to let you know that the notes would one way or the other be given to your governor, and I expect that you go to the notes and read it. I want to let you also know that the exam is CBE, which makes it even easier for you. For those of you who are students of Ekiti State University 200 level. So prepare your minds for the exam. The exam will not be too difficult. This course is not as difficult as you may have seen. And I wish you all the best. And if there's any question, can anyone ask a question? I'll give you 2 minutes if there's any question. 2 minutes if you have any question concerning it before I pull off. 2 minutes. Okay, class, we meet on Monday.